Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And now I'm joined by Lord Peter Hennessy, the greatest constitutional expert of our time.
Steady, John.
Come on, you've got a long perspective. Do we go back to the 1880 Irish rule debate, or what do we go back to find anything as momentous as this?
Well, we have a tremendous job on our hands to pick anything up from the past, because this is of itself, it's sui generis. It's got so many moving parts to it, all of which are vexing, but when you put them all together, it produces a political weather system that's almost impossible to read. I've never been more baffled in my life.
But what about a Prime Minister losing as often as she's lost? She's clearly about to lose now. I mean, can she carry on constitutionally?
The unwritten constitution is amazingly flexible. Philip Ziegler, who's a very clever man, once said to my MA students, it proceeds on the basis of instantly invented precedents. And what happens is, we look for precedents from the past and redo them, jiggle them together to fit the new circumstances, and try and find a way through. But
well, give us the precedent we're going to build on now.
I think this is a new one. I remember Churchill was Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1925 and wasn't very good at it. It was a gold standard crisis. And he said, since the war, all the maps are out of date and the compasses have been broken. That's exactly where we are tonight. But the only thing we can be sure of, the result we're going to get in just a minute, will score a very deep line across the page of our national history. Who knows where that line will lead to? But today will be revisited by historians for generations to come.
It's an amazing statement because, I mean, we're living through a most extraordinary thing in which our own country is so desperately divided. Absolutely. And the interesting thing is the Commons actually reflects almost exactly the divisions in the country.
It is. And
therefore it's a rather good institution.
It is a remarkable institution. And one of the great worries about all this is Brexit has stress-tested Parliament as an institution, and indeed our whole system of government. And one of my worries is, and I'm an optimist by nature normally, is that if Parliament cannot find a way through somehow, not tonight obviously, or pretty obviously, I'm surprised if it did, but within a reasonable span of time, the public may lose real confidence in its system of government. They're not exactly radiant about MPs and legislators at the moment, and so that's the big question. Brexit has got this extraordinary property, or the European question since 1950 when it first confronted us, has got this extraordinary fissile property, which means that it stress tests people, institutions and parties. And our entire party structure can't handle it because it's a left-right divide, our party system, and Europe is not a left-right question.
The extraordinary thing is that Parliament itself is shrouded in scaffolding, as if it is itself falling down. We know it's having to be renewed, but it is an extraordinary symbol of the way things are going.
It is indeed, as indeed this is this remarkable cacophony here.
Have you seen anything like this before?
Never.
In the middle of a debate?
All these flags. We used to think we were an understated people. Look at this. I know they're hyperactive and inflamed by the question, perhaps to an unusual degree, but the decorous side of British politics, in fact, in some ways, it's quite wonderful.
What? Let's break it. Here we go. Here's the result.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
That's a 200 vote defeat.
That's extraordinary. Well,
massive.
It's not entirely unexpected, but it's much bigger than I expected myself.
That, Gary, is too big for her surely now to say, I'm still in charge and I'm going back to Europe?
The government was desperately hoping to keep it way, way, way below that number, and I think it will be an absolute shock to the system. The sort of strategy that she was talking about to Cabinet today, which involved probably not reaching out to Jeremy Corbyn, but reaching out to a few Labour backbenchers, just trying to do a bit more incremental stuff, what she'd been doing already. That doesn't wash now. We do seem to have moved into a new moment. And now the Prime Minister's speaking.
It means nothing has moved.
This
Here
deal,
we go.
but tonight's vote
Prime Minister
tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. And people, particularly EU citizens who've made their home here, and UK citizens living in the EU, deserve clarity on these questions as soon as possible.
Order! Order! There's no good people shouting. There will be an opportunity for other points of order, but the Prime Minister must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Those whose jobs rely on our trade with the EU need that clarity. So, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to set out briefly how the government intends to proceed. First, we need to confirm whether this government still enjoys the confidence of the House. I believe that it does, but given the scale and importance of tonight's vote, it's right that others have the chance to test that question if they wish to do so. I can therefore confirm that if the official opposition table a confidence motion this evening in the form required by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, the Government will make time to debate that motion tomorrow. And if, as happened before Christmas, the official opposition decline to do so, we will, on this occasion, consider making time tomorrow to debate any motion in the form required from the other opposition parties, should they put one forward. Second, if the House confirms its confidence in this Government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The Government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Third, if these meetings yield such ideas, the Government will then explore them with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by offering two reassurances. The first is to those who fear that the Government's strategy is to run down the clock to the 29th of March. That is not our strategy. I've always believed that the best way forward is to leave in an orderly way with a good deal, and have devoted much of the last 2 years negotiating such a deal. As you confirmed, Mr. Speaker, the amendment to the business motion tabled last week by my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Beaconsfield, is not legally binding, but the Government respects the will of the House. We will therefore make a statement about the way forward and table an amendable motion by Monday. The second reassurance is to the British people who voted to leave the European Union in the referendum 2.5 years ago. I became Prime Minister immediately after that referendum. I believe it's my duty to deliver on their instruction, and I intend to do so. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The Government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the Government to do just that.
Should be next, I think.
I will come to other colleagues, but first of all, point of order, the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The result of tonight's vote is the greatest defeat for a government since the 1920s in this House. This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. I hear the words of the Prime Minister, but actions of her government of the past 2 years speak equally clearly. She is only attempting to reach out now to try to keep her failed process and deal alive after it's been so roundly rejected by Parliament on behalf of the people of this country. Labour has laid out our priorities consistently. No deal must be taken off the table. A permanent customs union must be secured, and people's rights and protections must be guaranteed so they do not fall behind. At every turn, the Prime Minister has closed the door on dialogue. Businesses begged her to negotiate a comprehensive customs union. Trade union leaders pressed her for the same thing. They were ignored. In the last 2 years, she's only had one priority: the Conservative Party. Her governing principle of delay and denial has reached the end of the line. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government, and I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
That's it. The Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, has tabled a motion of no confidence. Gary.
Jeremy Corbyn's been holding back from doing this because he doesn't think he can win it. But what's extraordinary tonight is the scale of that defeat means that all sorts of other possibilities open up the other side of that vote, because we think that the DUP will row in with the Tory MPs. They'll all come back together for the vote tomorrow, and then it looks as though we move into a new dispensation. There was Theresa May saying that she's going to reach across the floor and try and find out where the consensus is. Jeremy Corbyn coming back at her, I think many people across the party divide would say, saying that, with some accuracy, saying that she was pretty late in doing that. This would mean, though, that she'd have to pivot to a position a long way from where she's been, potentially full membership of the customs union, maybe even more than that, a softer Brexit, even than that.
Gary Gibbon, let's go straight now to Krishnan in the House of Commons lobby with guests streaming in.
Yeah, thank you, John. Joining me now, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Joanna Cherry from the Scottish National Party, and Sammy Wilson from the Democratic Unionists. First of all, there's going to be a vote of no confidence. Should she go? You've been wanting her to go.
Well, I lost the vote of no confidence within the Conservative Party. I've accepted that result, and I will support the Prime Minister and the government in the vote tomorrow.
So what happens now?
What happens now? Well, the Prime Minister set it out in her statement, which I thought she did extremely well and clearly, that she will consult, she will see what there is support for, and then she'll go back to the EU and say, look, I couldn't get this through, it needs to be changed.
Yes.
What she said in her statement was very sensible.
She clearly still thinks her deal is the basis of any future.
A majority of well over 200 says otherwise.
Joanna Cherry.
Of course she should go. This is the biggest defeat for a British government in modern history. She's made a complete mess of the negotiations. The only thing she's got right is that she's acknowledged she needs to reach out to senior parliamentarians from across the House, but she's not the person to lead now. I think what we need is a temporary executive of unity to go back to the EU to ask for an extension of Article 50, hold a second EU referendum, and then revoke Article 50, hopefully in the light of a Remain vote. And she needs to involve the Scots in that. If it wasn't for Scottish parliamentarians, we wouldn't know that the United Kingdom had the right to unilaterally revoke Article 50. She needs to listen to the voice of the devolved administrations, and she needs to acknowledge the fact that the Scottish Parliament has a mandate to hold a second independence referendum.
Sammy Wilson, you now hold this government's future in your hands. What are you going to do?
Well, I mean, the government holds its future in its hands. The government has to listen to the message, a very clear message that was given tonight, not just by the opposition parties, but also by a large section of the Conservative Party. And the Prime Minister now needs to go back to Europe and tell Europe, we are not going to roll over any longer. We want a deal which gives us a fair relationship with you in the future, but we are not going to be some footstool for Brussels for the future.
Why are you giving her your confidence tomorrow?
Because
when there is no reason to think she's going to do what you want her to do.
Well, if she doesn't do that, and I mean, we've made it clear all along that if she proceeded with this agreement, which would have destroyed the Union, which would have separated Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom, which would have damaged us economically by cutting us off from the rest of the United Kingdom, then we would not support her government. But that is no longer going to happen, because Parliament has told her she cannot go down that route, and therefore we want to see a Conservative government delivering on its own manifesto and on the result of the referendum. When they do that, they'll have our full backing.
Right, and when none of that works, are you happy to crash out on March the 29th?
Well, if we reach the 29th of March, it is not whether we are happy to crash out or not.
Are you prepared
once we reach the 29th of March, we will not be crashing out. First of all, we will be entering a relationship with the EU based on the same relationship as we have with America and with other countries in the world, a regulated trading regime.
That's just not true.
It is true. It is true.
It's the nonsense that we will be in the same relationship as America. We won't. There are all sorts of bilateral
Channel
deals.
4 may believe that. Channel 4 may believe that, but
no,
the truth of the matter...
No, it's a fact. It's not what Channel 4 are saying. Sammy, it's not what Channel 4 are saying. It's a fact. No, it's a fact. And the offer the deal you want from the EU is not on the table. The backstop that you dislike so much is there because of the United Kingdom's international obligations. It's time to wake up and smell the coffee. The reality is, it's this deal or Remain. the vote should now go to the people of Britain, and they should get the choice between this pitiful deal that Parliament has voted down and the choice of remaining, and I'm confident that they'll choose to remain. And if they don't, the Scots will be going their separate way.
Well, what does appear to be the case now is that if all of this fails, there will be indicative votes. Parliament will make it clear that no deal is not what Parliament wants. What are you going to do then? What should the government do then?
Well,
ignore it?
You say that Parliament will say this, but Parliament passed with an overwhelming majority the Article 50 Act to begin a 2-year process, and it passed the Withdrawal Act, both of these in the knowledge that if no deal was agreed, we would leave without a deal.
So an indicative vote should be ignored, is that what you're saying?
An indicative vote cannot challenge the law which was passed by Parliament.
Absolutely, but the question is, should the government respect an indicative vote or not?
No,
you seem to be saying the government should forget it.
The government should respect the law. Parliament has the means to legislate. If it hasn't legislated, the law it passed, the Withdrawal Act was passed in June of last year. Most of the MPs saying we can't leave without a deal actually voted for a law that provides for us to leave without a deal, and not, if I may say so, crashing out, which is a politically prejudicial
Leaving
term.
without a deal.
Yeah, but Channel 4 really shouldn't be using these politically charged terms. You're meant to be an impartial broadcaster.
And we are.
So let's just. Yeah, but you were saying to Mr. Wilson crashing out, and you really ought not to say that because you're meant to be impartial.
I'm talking to you about whether the government should respect the will of Parliament, and you're saying an indicative vote.
An indicative vote cannot
should be
overturn the law.
ignored.
Absolutely. The law...
So the government should just ignore it?
For very good reason. The law is hard to change. That's one of the foundation stones of protecting our liberties and our constitutional legal order. So of course the law overrides any individual motion of the House of Commons.
Thank you all very much.
The House of Commons can vote to change the law. That's what needs to happen now. You're always going on about how your beloved Parliament is supreme. It's time for it to act, to change the law, to enable us to have a second vote.
The House of Commons cannot change the view of the people of the United Kingdom who voted 2.5 years ago to leave. We have a date for leaving. We have a date for leaving, and we will leave on the 29th of March.
Northern Ireland.
Let's see. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. Now back to John. No, I beg your pardon. So we're going to Matt Fry now in Brussels.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, welcome back to Strasbourg here. So, I mean, just a few minutes ago when the result was announced in London, you could hear the gasps on every floor of this building because practically everyone was watching proceedings in London live. Let's talk to Maurad McGuinness, Vice President of the European Parliament. 230. What's your response to that?
Well, I think you said people were gasping. I mean, there's no doubt that everyone was glued to what was happening in the House of Commons. I suppose in a calm moment, I'd say this is very decisive. I thought the Prime Minister, in her summary after the result was delivered, was quite clear about the next steps. We had anticipated perhaps not quite as big a margin. And I think we're going to have to wait and analyse who's voted what way, because what strikes me, and always has, is that this has been rejected by such a large margin, but people voted against it for different reasons. So, for example, some people dislike the idea of an agreement at all, so they want a hard Brexit. Others, like Jeremy Corbyn, wants a customs union, so they don't like the flavour of it. Well, the deal is on the table from the European Union side. It's very clear what the House of Commons has said in terms of the numbers. It is not clear what the House of Commons wants next. So this is for me quite critical. So we hear the result, very clear and very strong. We also have heard Jeremy Corbyn and others say a no deal must be off the table. So my question is, and I think Donald Tusk, President of the Council, is also saying this, so if this deal is not acceptable and if no deal is not acceptable, what will work? And I'm asking this of the United Kingdom.
So you would welcome the indicative votes in the House of Commons that go through the various different options, for instance?
Yeah, but I don't think it's clear from the votes that have taken place thus far as to what a majority in the House of Commons will want. And I take it back to my question. You can analyse the big picture and say, yes, it's rejected. But you have to look at the details here, because what would satisfy some in the House of Commons in terms of tweaking will dissatisfy others. So I think we're going to have to be calm, listen to what the House of Commons has said, but this is really an issue for the United Kingdom, as it has been thus far and continues to be.
But when it comes to Brexit and the economic repercussions, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom are joined at the hip on this one. This affects you almost as much as it affects us.
Absolutely, and we've always said that, and we're near neighbours and we're good friends, and we have to find a way forward. But remember, Ireland is the European Union. We're not part of just, we are intrinsically part of the EU 27, and therefore the pain that we might feel will be felt by the rest of Europe. And as the Prime Minister very clearly said, the pain of a no deal will affect British citizens in a way which I think needs to be fully understood.
But there are so many potential options. Which one would you like to see advanced now?
Well, I suppose, even though this will sound strange, I'm glad that we've had a vote. I'm glad that at this stage we know the extent of the rejection, but I'm going to go back to my original point and say I need to reflect perhaps overnight and tomorrow as to who has voted what way, what would satisfy different members of the House of Commons, because while there are those who want a hard Brexit and want Brexit, there are also members of the House of Commons who dream of another vote. So we have to be quite analytical and quite clear from a European perspective that the deal we have negotiated in good faith with the United Kingdom remains on the table.
And in 5 seconds, a second referendum, yes or no?
It's not for me, not my call.
All right. Maura McGuinness, the Vice President of the European Parliament, back to you in London.
Thank you, Matt, there in Strasbourg.
Where the House of Commons, a short while ago, delivered a crushing defeat on the Brexit agreement negotiated by Theresa May. With 432 MPs voting against, it was the biggest government defeat on record, the biggest Conservative rebellion to boot, while just 202 voted for the withdrawal agreement offered by the Prime Minister. That's a very substantial defeat by 230 votes for that current deal that was offered. Government will now face a motion of no confidence in the Commons tomorrow, tabled by the Labour Party. The Prime Minister says that if the government survives that vote, she will come to Parliament on Monday with a new proposal to take the Brexit process forward. The UK is due to leave the European Union on the 29th of March. First tonight, our political editor Laura Kuensberg reports on that vote and the government defeat.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
No ordinary defeat, no ordinary times.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock!
Gasps from MPs, sharp intakes of breath. They don't begin to cover it.
The noes to the left, 432.
A grave moment, but celebration outside. How can the Prime Minister move on when her main mission has suffered the biggest defeat for a century?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
MPs had to be shushed to hear her.
The House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support. Nothing about how or even if it intends to honour the decision the British people took in a referendum Parliament decided to hold. If the House confirms its confidence in this government, I will then hold meetings with my colleagues, our confidence and supply partner, the DUP, and senior parliamentarians from across the House to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. The government will approach these meetings in a constructive spirit, but given the urgent need to make progress, we must focus on ideas that are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the government to do just that.
No signal really of a major change of direction. No surprise, Labour will use this moment of danger to push for a vote to collapse the government.
This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal, and that verdict is absolutely decisive. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country. The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
The Prime Minister whisked back to Downing Street, where she'll plan how to fight that tomorrow. Neither she nor her ministers were expecting a result as bad as this.
We've heard a lot from people about what they're opposed to. We've heard very little from people about what they're actually in favour of. People are saying they want to uphold the result of the referendum, but they're not saying actually what they want to vote for.
The Prime Minister will discuss with her own backbenchers, with the DUP and with other opposition parties to find the way forward that is potentially negotiable with the EU.
The crowd might not want it. The government is likely to survive the vote tomorrow.
Absolutely brilliant. I hope May gets the sack now.
It's time really to put Brexit in the bin.
Delighted. I couldn't be happier. I believe democracy has been served tonight.
The deal is horrendous. The question really is what happens next.
Well, there's no shortage of big voices lining up to tell her what.
What she needs to do is, with a high heart, fortified by, the massive rejection of the House of Commons, go back to our friends and partners and say, look, we need another way out of this.
She now needs to set aside any pre-conditions she has, if you like, of what she thinks is the route forward, and now appreciate that actually, in asking MPs, perhaps we can find a consensus.
The significance of this is, I think, that this is the beginning of the end of Brexit.
Let's go back to the European Union, make it clear to them this deal is not going to work, and they have to come up with a deal which reflects a change on the difficulties which caused her to lose this vote tonight.
The plan has to be to put it back to the electorate. Parliament's not suddenly going to manage to solve the conundrum that it's failed to solve in the last 2.5 years.
All of those fine words, perhaps, but guess what? None of them agree. That's the Prime Minister, number 10, and the Cabinet's nightmare after more than 2 years of argument.
Take care. Yeah, bye.
Remember, this deal was hard fought in the inner sanctums of the EU. They're frustrated too.
Now it's time for the UK to tell us the next steps. And on our side, we will remain united and determined to reach a deal.
Do you trust Theresa May? Can she do it?
The Prime Minister hasn't just lost, her plan's been crushed by an accidental alliance that doesn't agree. But the government, let alone Theresa May, shows no sign of packing up yet.
And Laura is with me now outside Parliament. Well, nobody foresaw really the scale of this, did they? So where does it leave us?
Well, it's certainly worse than the government imagined. There's no question about that. And there's also no doubt that the government is extremely frustrated about what has happened here. We saw that in the House of Commons today. You know, the Attorney General, senior member of the government, pointing the finger at Tory MPs behind him, saying, what are you doing? The irony that many people in government believe here is that people who campaign for Brexit are trying to disrupt the Prime Minister's version of it. And there is deep unease in government about the fact that they have sweated and struggled to find a way through it. They think it's the only credible one and no one else has got a better idea. And there's real concern that none of the rival tribes in Parliament have got a plan that would get anything like the kind of consensus that is needed to get through the House of Commons. But the fact is, the Prime Minister, wherever she lands, whatever she seizes on next, has to get this through Parliament in order for this to happen. So, her alternatives, talk to other members of different political parties. She says she'll do that. But there's no sign that she's willing to junk her whole plan. It seems she wants to look at tweaks rather than radical changes. But right now, Parliament isn't just a hurdle that she fell over on the first attempt. It seems like a brick wall. And her critics think that she does have to do something much more than a few nips and tucks here and there around the place in order to have a real chance of getting anything like a compromise through that place.
We need to explore some of those options, Laura. We'll do it a little later on. Thanks very much. Laura will be back with us before the end of the programme. Let's get some more reaction away from Westminster, really, because there are eyes on this around the world, but certainly in the City of London and, of course, in Brussels. And I'd like to go first to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, in Brussels. Katya, the scale of this defeat clearly has taken lots of people by surprise. What's been the reaction there?
Well, tweets came in thick and fast tonight after the vote from EU leaders, on their Twitter feed, expressing regret at the result of the vote, expressing hope that a no-deal Brexit still can be avoided, and above all, a big plea for clarity. We heard this particularly from Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, and from Michel Barnier, the EU's chief Brexit negotiator. As I've said before, the EU had no pre-prepared, coordinated, planned and accepted plan B for this case scenario. So my high-level contacts are telling me tonight, listen, tonight or tomorrow, there's nothing the EU can come up with to solve this situation. With only 73 days to go now till Brexit, they say it's all very well for MPs to say what they don't want. They don't want this deal. They don't want a no-deal Brexit. But what is it that they will unite around? Then they can come and tell us, they're saying to me in the EU, and we'll see if it's doable, if it's actually realistic. There's increasing talk here and speculation tonight that the Prime Minister may now ask for an extension to Article 50, this official negotiating process, but there's also a reluctance here to grant it if it only means keeping on going round in circles.
Katya, many thanks. Katya Adler there in Brussels. Well, the City of London, the financial markets, obviously watching this like hawks, and our business editor Simon Jack is there to tell us what's been the reaction there. Simon?
Well, two reactions, Hugh. One from the financial markets, one from, if you like, the real economy. Financial markets expected her to lose. They did not expect her to lose this big. But what was even more surprising is the currency traders who swore blind to me this afternoon that if she had a crushing defeat, it would weigh heavily on the pound. It didn't happen. The pound went up. So what are we supposed to make of that? Well, the new wisdom, to be born out of the death of the old wisdom we had this afternoon, is that the growing animosity within Parliament towards a no-deal outcome means that that outcome, which financial markets fear the most, is unlikely. The other line we're hearing is that with this defeat, a no Brexit, at least on the 29th of March, is growing in likelihood. So it seems the currency traders know more about it than you, me, or everyone sitting at home. In the real economy, however, businesses are not so confident. What they're saying to me tonight is that yet another milestone in this saga has come and gone, and yet they are no much the wiser. And a lot of people saying we are lost in a fog of confusion, saying we need to move forward. One exasperated business group said this is like playing a game of high-stakes poker with the real economy and people's jobs. But on today's showing, I would say it's less like poker and more like blind man's buff.
Simon, thanks very much once again. Simon Jack, the latest thoughts there in the city. And Katya, thanks to you too, our Europe editor in Brussels. So now that Mrs May's deal has been heavily defeated by that record margin, and now that Labour has tabled its motion of no confidence in the government, and that'll take place tomorrow, what is the likely course of events in the days ahead? Here's our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, with his analysis.
So now what? Normally, a Prime Minister might resign after a bad defeat on a signature policy, but Mrs May is nothing if not dogged, stubborn, and normal feels a long time ago. Let's look at the plan for a vote of no confidence. Jeremy Corbyn's been waiting, he says, for the best chance of winning. Some say he knows he won't win that vote, and he's playing for time, trying to fend off pressure on his own side for a new referendum, which he's not keen on supporting. That means the real struggle now will be about who ends up controlling Brexit. What's Mrs May's plan B? Canvass other Brexit plans at Westminster and, she says, see if any of them fly in Brussels. But she'd still hope her deal could be the basis of an agreement, and that would still need more reassurances from the EU. hoping to get a chance to have another go in the Commons, and next time counting on more Brexiteers backing her rather than risk ending up with no Brexit. The great fear among many MPs across parties is of a Brexit with no deal. Some of them mean to launch a parliamentary takeover to try to take control away from ministers. Many other MPs want somehow to set down plans for a softer Brexit deal, maybe similar to Norway's, or perhaps a fresh referendum. The options will have to be thrashed out. The battle of Brexit in the Commons has only just started. And the pace here will pick up quickly. The coming no confidence vote will be backed by Labour, the SNP and other opposition MPs. If the government loses, Mrs May will have 14 days to win a second vote or call an election. Don't expect that to happen. Tory rebels and the DUP want to kill the deal, not force the snap election Mr Corbyn wants, not now anyway. On Monday, we will see an alliance of MPs try to change the Commons rulebook to take control of Brexit. They'll vote to allow a senior committee of the House to form a new Brexit plan, backed by law. That would be an historic shift in the balance of power away from Mrs May and her ministers, potentially all ministers in future. Some MPs and cabinet ministers simply want a series of votes to help find out what kind of Brexit MPs would support. Mrs May's been resisting that. Somehow it will be up to the Commons to agree to some kind of Brexit. That's if it can. On every front now, Theresa May and her team are facing a power struggle of a kind no Prime Minister has had to deal with in the past. Whatever happens, there's more talk now of maybe having to delay Brexit to allow more time for whatever Parliament decides in the end. Mrs May's promised Britain will leave on schedule on March 29th. Delay could mean ministers resign, but so would no deal. Whichever way you turn, you're looking at political crisis. But stability in British politics is no longer an option.
Well, that was John Pienaar there. Now, the most persistent objection to Mrs May's deal, as we know, is the so-called backstop provision. That's the guarantee that there will be an open border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy joins me now from the border. And we've heard so much from politicians on this, Emma. I'm just wondering, what is your assessment of the state of public opinion on the importance of this backstop?
Well, it's worth remembering that a majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the referendum. So there's been huge opposition in some communities to anything that feels like it changes the status quo. And that difficult question to answer all along has been how to keep life here flowing the way it does now, with those close economic ties between north and south, those production lines which crisscross the border, while at the same time taking Northern Ireland out of the big EU club. Now, we've heard the DUP, of course, voicing their opposition very strongly to the deal at Westminster, but they don't speak for everyone here in Northern Ireland. Here, many businesses were backing Theresa May's deal, many of them not minding so much that Northern Ireland may have to be treated differently and may have to stay more tightly tied to EU rules. Now, reacting to the outcome of tonight's vote, the Irish government tonight has released a statement saying, regrettably, it will now have to intensify preparations for a no-deal Brexit even further. And I think we'll see many companies on both sides of this border doing exactly the same, because until there's some sign of resolution at Westminster, people here are simply now having to face up to the practicalities and the realities of what a no-deal Brexit may mean for them.
Emma, many thanks again. Emma Vardy there for us in Newry with the latest thoughts there. The result of that EU referendum in 2016, of course, revealed deep divisions across the UK over its links with the EU. And one of the results that mirrored the national result was in Sutton Coldfield in Birmingham, where 51.7% voted to leave. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has spent the day in the town to assess reaction and to get the view from Sutton Coldfield.
On Brexit, Sutton Coldfield is the United Kingdom. Like the country, 52% here voted to leave, 48% to stay. At the Warmley Club, they finished their drinks as MPs finished off the Prime Minister's deal.
Well, it was inevitable that it was going to happen. She was a Remainer, negotiating on the behalf of the Leavers.
What do you think she should do now?
Resign.
Really?
I know she's gone for a bad deal and it's been rejected, but Theresa May
could become the new Iron Lady here. She's in a great position now to go back to the EU.
Remainers were despondent.
I think it's just a flipping mess, and we're all waiting in the background trying to find out what is going to happen. Businesses are suffering, other important things have been pushed to one side. It's a total disaster, and I've just got no confidence in politicians anymore.
So with no agreement on the nuts and bolts of a Brexit deal, what now? This factory exports to 28 countries.
I think it should go for no deal. People keep talking to me about certainty. I've never had any certainty in 30 odd years that I've been in business.
But is no deal just going to cause a great risk for your business?
No. No.
Why not?
Because the ports will be open.
Although a vote should remain, I think they should sort a deal out where we can leave, because that was the majority for the country.
So do you think if she brings her deal back again, that MPs should get behind it?
I think so, yeah.
The sense you get out here is there is no agreement either on the way forward now, but there is real anger and embarrassment about the way the Brexit process has been handled.
You see it is the upshot or the outcome, the result.
Some here still think it's worth learning French. This class also narrowly favoured leave. Carol was one of them.
She's just doing what the people have voted for, which is democracy. They're just making a mockery of all our parliamentary system. It's just, in the rest of the world, must think we're daft.
I'd voted to exit, but it can't work.
And why did you vote to leave then, if you've now changed your mind?
I just hated the thought of Brussels dictating us and stealing all our money.
But now you don't mind?
I think the alternative's not there now.
Steve voted Remain.
I think there should be another referendum because the Leave campaign has shown to be a pack of lies or a fantasy.
The deal defeated, but voters like MPs still divided on if, how and when Brexit should happen. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
The view there from Sutton Coldfield. We heard a short while ago, of course, from Northern Ireland. Well, the devolved governments in Scotland and Wales are insisting on their right to have a major say in how the Brexit process moves forward now after this vote. So let's talk to our Wales correspondent Sian Lloyd in Cardiff and our Scotland editor Sarah Smith, who's in Edinburgh for us. And I just want to start with Sian. Given that Wales voted to leave back in 2016, Sian, what is the kind of input the Welsh Government wants into this process?
Well, the position of the Welsh Government has been that the Prime Minister's deal wouldn't work for Wales. It has wanted a softer Brexit. It has said that because of the nature of the Welsh economy, Europe is its biggest export market, that it really needed this softer Brexit without trade barriers. Tonight, the First Minister has said in response to this vote that Brexit should be delayed. No deal, it says, would be catastrophic for the Welsh economy. But we know today, after having a briefing here with the Welsh Brexit Minister, that they are really ramping up their preparations for a no-deal scenario. Now, as you reminded us, Hugh, Wales did vote overall to leave the European Union, and really what people here tonight, those working in the factories, in the ports, farmers and in Welsh business, are all asking is, how will this all end?
Sian, many thanks. Let's go and talk to Sarah Smith, our Scotland editor. Sarah, what's the latest you have there on the kind of thinking within the Scottish Government following this vote?
Well, they have made it very clear that the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, says the Prime Minister must delay Article 50 to avoid the UK crashing out of the EU without a deal. And she is insisting that there must now be a second referendum on Brexit, and one which has as an option on the ballot the option to remain in the EU. The SNP are the largest party in the House of Commons calling for a second referendum. They don't necessarily believe that it would produce a result to remain across the whole of the UK, but they are pretty convinced there would be a strong Remain result in Scotland, as there was, of course, in 2016. I can also tell you the Prime Minister has asked for a phone conversation with Nicola Sturgeon this evening. They may be talking right now, although it's difficult to see what they could possibly agree on, not least because the first thing Nicola Sturgeon will tell her is that all of her 35 SNP MPs plan to vote against Theresa May's government in the vote of no confidence tomorrow.
Sarah, many thanks again. Sarah Smith with the latest thoughts there in Edinburgh, and Sean Lloyd for us in the Senedd in Cardiff. We'll be back at Westminster a little later. Laura will be joining me again to consider what is next, possibly. But now back to Clive for the day's other news.
Hugh, thanks for that. On a highly charged night that has already earned its place as a significant milestone in the history of this country. Quite where it leaves Theresa May, her government, MPs in general, and indeed all of the rest of us, there's a much more open question. It is true that the defeat was widely predicted, but we've all seen Prime Ministers defy the odds here before. Not tonight, not by the longest shot. The raw numbers are bad enough. A defeat of 230 votes, the worst in history. But throw in the fact that this was her defining purpose in office, and you get a sense of the scale of the humiliation. In normal times, you would expect a Prime Minister to come out to Downing Street any moment now to resign. But these are not normal times. And even the Prime Minister's critics would be hard pushed to say what purpose that would serve. The Labour leader responded by calling a no confidence vote, which is likely to take place tomorrow. She will almost certainly survive it. We will do our best tonight to try and map a path through this fog. But first, here is Robert's account of perhaps the most impactful parliamentary vote of the modern age.
It was a vote that would shape our future for years to come.
202. The noes to the left, 432.
And she was utterly humiliated, suffering the worst defeat on an important policy of any government in more than 100 years.
Point of order, the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House has spoken and the government will listen. It is clear that the House does not support this deal, but tonight's vote tells us nothing about what it does support.
Theresa May said she'd now sound out her partners in government, Northern Ireland's DUP and other senior parliamentarians from all parties, to see if a different version of Brexit could command their support, and then she'd see if the European Union would agree to that revised plan to leave the EU.
Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled and to work with the government to do just that.
But there's a huge hurdle for her tomorrow.
The most important issue facing us is that the government has lost the confidence of this House and this country. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government.
In normal circumstances, when a Prime Minister loses a vote of this magnitude, he or she quits. Why isn't the Prime Minister quitting?
Well, these are not normal times, and the Prime Minister has the confidence of the party, and I very much hope and believe tomorrow we'll see that she has the confidence of the Commons. She is the best placed person to find a Brexit deal that can get through the House of Commons.
It was a historic day, and these are historic photos taken on MPs' smartphones, rebels trooping through the lobbies to destroy the PM's deal, including Boris Johnson and arguably the most senior of Tory backbenchers, chair of their 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. The writing was on the wall when MP after MP from all parties turned against the Prime Minister, such as the former Minister Owen Paterson.
This is a betrayal of what the people voted for.
A Labour MP, Lisa Nandy, who had wanted to back Brexit.
We are playing with fire here. We are breaking our democracy.
And a May loyalist, Sir Hugo Swire.
It is with a heavy heart that I shall not be supporting the government this evening.
So does one of the architects of Brexit have no regrets for his role in killing the PM's version of Brexit?
This deal is finished, it's over, it's dead. We need a new deal, a better deal, and it's, I think, there to be done. She needs to go back and get something that really allows us to take advantage of Brexit.
Even after the voting shock, there's no love lost between Tories, as the champion of a referendum, Anna Soubry, made clear.
We'll have people like Boris Johnson going around talking a whole load of nonsense about being able to find some magic deal that will get through the Commons. He's talking crap. Sorry, but you know, we've got to, everybody now has got to be proper grown-ups and responsible, and they've got to put their national interest first. And the national interest is the only way is to get it back to the British people and let them decide.
So how likely is it that the Prime Minister will tomorrow lose that confidence motion? Well, Northern Ireland's DUP, one of the architects of her big flop today, says tomorrow it will stand by her.
Now that we have managed to defeat the withdrawal agreement with its toxic backstop, it would be entirely wrong for us now to bring the government down.
A very odd alliance, which explains the Prime Minister's disaster. Cheers at her failure from those who want what they think of as a truer Brexit and those who want no Brexit at all. Home tonight for a Prime Minister who survived many previous flops, but none perhaps as big as tonight's. Robert Peston, News at 10.
All right then, so while the long-term direction of Brexit remains as clouded as ever, and remember it is officially only 73 days away now, we do at least know what is going to happen tomorrow. But what follows that vote of no confidence as the time ticks down? A look then at where we might go from here.
The exact moment the Prime Minister's deal died inside Parliament this evening, defeat was a certainty. The route out of the deadlock is much more murky. But first, the Prime Minister has to fight for her government's survival, with a vote of no confidence to be debated tomorrow.
I can't see any other option now other than a general election to break the impasse and ensure that we have a new government that is in place to renegotiate with the EU a deal that will provide consensus.
With the DUP backing the government in a confidence motion, that's unlikely.
Let's get it now!
But at this People's Vote rally, they hope it clears the way to a second referendum.
The next steps, in my view, the only thing that we can be doing is by the end of this week coming out very firmly and strongly for what our members want, what Labour supporters want, what our party policy determines, and that is a people's vote.
Before there's any chance of that, the Prime Minister has said she'll hold talks with other parties. Finding a cross-party consensus might be one way out of the deadlock. That could mean moving towards staying in the customs union. One of the Prime Minister's closest allies believes consensus is the logical way forward.
I think it will be very sensible for the government to look across the House to see what sort of deal would be acceptable, would get a majority. I suspect any deal that gets a majority is going to have to get support from across the House, and however the government seeks to achieve that, that seems to me to be the most likely and therefore sensible option.
And then it will be back to renegotiate with the EU. But tweaks to the deal won't be enough to get these Brexiters on side.
Is there anything the Prime Minister could come back with from Brussels that would make you vote for a version of this deal a second time round?
There are five fundamental weaknesses in this deal. We've listed it. She needs a new deal.
I think what we need to know is that there is a path towards the better, brighter Brexit and a transition to a best-in-class free trade agreement.
So what does this do to the Brexit timetable? One option is that Article 50 is extended.
The Prime Minister did not mention Article 50.
Yvette Cooper urged just such a course this evening. Many believe a Brexit date of March the 29th is no longer realistic.
Even if the deal had been accepted today, we're running out of time to have a bill, and given the delay caused by today's vote, an extension to Article 50 looks almost inevitable now.
So the bell has tolled on this deal. Does that make no deal more likely? The Brexiteer wing of the party say that's nothing to fear, but MPs insist they would find a way to stop it.
Now I have some colleagues who believe we should have a no-deal Brexit, but I have to say they've got to look around them and understand that there is a huge majority in Parliament which disagrees with them and thinks, validly, that a no-deal Brexit would be so damaging to this country that it can't be contemplated.
There's been a noisy circus outside Parliament all day. Inside, MPs were warned they had a clear choice: vote for order or vote for chaos. They've made their decision in the government's own view. we're in for some bumpy times ahead. Romilly Weeks, News at 10, Westminster.
Well, let's rewind a bit now to the details of that vote earlier in the evening. In total, only 202 MPs supported the Prime Minister's deal, while more than twice as many, 432, opposed it. It means the government was defeated by an unprecedented 230 votes. Those voting against her plan included 118 of her own party. If you take out all the MPs who have government jobs, the so-called payroll vote, she only managed to persuade around 70 of her backbench MPs to support her, a dismal number by any standards. And despite the government's efforts to draw support from Labour MPs, just 3 backed her tonight. Well, the fallout from those figures is still being felt around here at Westminster, and of course Robert is here with us to talk about this. Look, let's be blunt, millions of people all over the country will be tearing their hair out in frustration at all this. What happens next, in your view?
Look, this was an almost unprecedented catastrophe for any Prime Minister. It gives the lie that the problem with the deal was just that so-called backstop, that provision that Northern Ireland's DUP feared would drive a wedge between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. MP's criticism went far wider than that. Her fundamental problem was that she never set out and sold a vision of the UK's future relationship with the EU. Now, I have been talking to my sources on the other side of the channel in EU governments, and they cannot come up with any version of Brexit that she could now put to them, despite the fact she's going to sort of negotiate with senior parliamentarians, that they could agree to. And therefore tonight, Tom, I think we are in a chilling position that more than 2 years after we voted to leave the EU, we are looking at what some people would regard as the worst version of Brexit, a no-deal Brexit, which many people would say would do serious damage to our economy, or no Brexit at all. The Prime Minister is refusing to come to that conclusion right now, but frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if in a week or two she herself had to make a choice between no Brexit or a hard no-deal Brexit.
Okay, it is a miserable position indeed. Well, Robert is going to stay with us, and we will be back to talk to him later in the programme, because let's face it, there is an enormous amount to chew over. Now, events in the Commons were, of course, being watched very closely in Brussels, so closely that tweets from Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk were posted within minutes. Perhaps they expected the result. Now, our Europe editor, James Mates, is in Brussels tonight. James, you know, we've talked about this often enough. Only last night you were saying it kind of depends what the defeat is. What's been the reaction today?
Well, I mean, you said they were expecting the result. They weren't obviously expecting it to be this bad. And in many ways, it does change things, because now small tweaks, small compromises, even those aren't going to get this deal through the Commons. So they are thinking again. And the common theme across Europe tonight is, look, you've told us in no uncertain terms what you don't want. Please tell us what you do want. And the tweets tonight, Donald Tusk, the council president, said if a deal is impossible and no one wants no deal, then we'll find who will finally have the courage to say what the only positive solution is. No secret there. He thinks that solution should be no Brexit. Jean-Claude Juncker, I note with regret the outcome of the vote in the Commons this evening. I urge the UK to clarify its intentions. Time is almost up. And from the European Parliament's point man on Brexit, Guy Verhofstadt, a reason why they do still want to get on with this.
What we don't want is that this mess in British politics is now transferred and imported in European politics. So let's try to find a solution before the European elections.
One thing that does seem to be changing here is the view of extending Article 50. There was a time quite recently when they thought that it was concentrating minds in London. Now it's clear that having to have a complete rethink. There simply isn't time for that. So we are talking probably about an extension to maybe the 1st of July, maybe longer, if what Britain wants to do is hold either a general election or a second referendum. But crucially, under the rules, Britain has to ask for that before it can be granted.
OK, James, well, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, back here, I'm joined by the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, who's out representing the government tonight. No easy task, it must be said. Chris, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Simple question to begin with. Where do you go from here?
Well, where we go from here is first of all to deal with the motion of confidence tomorrow. The Prime Minister was quite right tonight in saying that we absolutely have to deal with that issue straight away. We have to demonstrate that Parliament still has confidence in the government. That is what will happen tomorrow. She challenged the opposition to table such a motion. They have done so. After that, we need to go back to, I think, parliamentarians generally on our own side, with our competence and supply partners, the DUP, and then with senior parliamentarians across the House to say, what are people in favour of? What we haven't heard in the last few days is very much about what people are in favour of. We've heard a lot about what they're opposed to. It's actually really important now we find out what they're going to vote for.
Do you accept that the Prime Minister's deal, your deal in effect, the government's deal, is now dead in the water?
Well, I mean, the reality is that tonight there's been a very decisive vote against it. And, you know, whatever happens, we can't just return to the same proposal tomorrow. But what we do have to do is to establish from parliamentarians what they're in favour of. You know, we've heard a lot, you know, for the Labour side, from Jeremy Corbyn today, and I spent a lot of time during the referendum campaign talking to Labour voters up and down the country who want to leave the European Union. Are Labour actually in favour of us leaving the European Union? And if so, in what form do they want us to do so? We've heard a lot from the Labour Party about what we're getting wrong. What we haven't heard from them is what they're actually in favour of. Do they want to keep free movement? Do they want to extend Article 50? Do they want us to stay in the European Union?
Chris, with respect, you're the government. What to do next is really your responsibility, is it not? I mean, we've just had Robert Peston suggesting that really now there is only one choice: either leave with no deal or go back to the people with for another referendum. Which of those options do you personally support?
Well, I want us to find a way through this and to find a deal. It is better that we leave the European Union with a partnership with our current partners and neighbours for the future. It's better that we find a way through this. I think the idea that we could go back to 17.4 million people and say to them, you know, you voted to leave, well actually we're not going to let that happen, completely unsustainable. Equally, those who are concerned about no deal, we are preparing for no deal. It's right and proper that we are. But it is much better for this country if we leave with a partnership, with an agreement and a friendly neighbourhood relationship with the European Union for the future. That's best for this country.
But Chris, you have been trying, and you know, one has to assume totally honestly, to get that deal that you could get through this House for the last 2 years. You simply haven't been able to do it, and let's be blunt, you're absolutely nowhere near to it tonight, and it's not clear that another few months of any kind of negotiation are going to make any difference. So I'd put the question to you again: you're faced, are you not, with a blunt choice: leave with no deal or go back to the people and ask them if they're sure. Which of those do you personally prefer?
So my sense is that Parliament, let alone me, but Parliament doesn't support either of those options, and so therefore what's important over the next few days is that parliamentarians on both sides of the fence, and it does matter that the Labour Party is involved here, because this has got to be agreed across Parliament, comes back and says what are we actually in favour of, and we take that back to the European Union and say to them, right, this is the position of the United Kingdom.
OK, Chris Grayling, Transport Secretary, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight.
You're very welcome.
Well, let's speak now to Labour's Richard Bergen, the Shadow Justice Secretary, who joins me here. Richard, good evening.
Hi,
how are
good
you?
to see you.
Look, an extraordinary night. You've put down this motion of no confidence. You're not going to win that, though. You would probably accept that.
Well, we shall see. We're in uncharted political waters. Whilst everybody was expecting a defeat for the Prime Minister tonight, very few people expected it to be the biggest defeat any government in UK history has ever suffered. 230 votes, 118 Conservative MPs voting against them, more even than voted against John Major when he was in trouble on a similar issue. So who knows what will happen tomorrow?
Well, let me ask the question a different way. Have you had any indication from the DUP, from any Tories, unlikely as that may seem, that they're going to vote with you?
Well, the Conservatives can wrestle with their consciences overnight on this one, but let's see what happens tomorrow. A day's a long time in politics. The vote's going to be...
A day's a lifetime in politics, the way things are going at the moment. OK, let's assume you don't win, because I think most people assume you don't. What happens next? Do you then go all out for a second referendum? We've been waiting months to really know what Labour policy is going to be. What is it going to be?
Well, our policy, of course, was decided unanimously.
No, I know what your policy is, but
it's
decision hour. What are you going to do?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn set out today in the House of Commons chamber when speaking. He said that next week we're going to be putting down an amendment with our proposal for a constructive way forward to get the country out of this mess that Theresa May has stubbornly got us into.
And that is a second referendum, I'm assuming.
It sets out our proposed negotiated. That's what we're going to be arguing for, and everyone knows that we're proposing that we should attempt to negotiate a permanent customs union, a strong single market relationship, no reduction in workers' rights, environmental protections or consumer rights.
Surely you would accept that time has run out for negotiating? We've been negotiating for 2 years. We've got a deal that the House has just overwhelmingly rejected.
I think that time has certainly run out for this Prime Minister, and she should go. She has no credibility as a negotiator, and this government, because its hands are tied behind its own back, negotiating with its own backbenchers, have no credibility whatsoever. They're lame duck negotiators that the EU are treating as such. And what we need is a new government to get a new deal with Europe.
Assuming we don't have a new government, we still have the same old government, somebody's got to break this logjam. Would you accept that going for a referendum would be the most dreadful betrayal of all those people who, in all honesty, went out and voted leave?
Well, our conference policy doesn't start off with a second referendum.
No, but it seems to end up with.
That is one of the options that should be considered in the event of all the options being exhausted. We're certainly not there yet. We accept and respect the outcome of the referendum. What we don't accept and we don't respect is a government that is holding the people of this country to ransom. The government is meant to be servant of the people, but what it's doing is telling people who voted leave it's either Theresa May's rotten deal or remain, and it's telling people who voted remain it's either Theresa May's rotten deal or disastrous no-deal Brexit.
OK, Richard, thank you very much. As you say, a day is a long time in politics. Who knows where we'll be this time tomorrow night. But for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, away from Westminster, certain areas will forever be associated with the way they voted in the referendum of June 2016. Rachel Younger is in Bristol, which voted to remain by 62 to 38, you probably recall. But first, to Allegra Stratton in Sunderland, almost a mirror opposite, where the Remain vote, 39%, was eclipsed by 61% who voted for leave. Allegra, over to you.
Yes, Tom, the Leave voters we've spoken to this evening, watched the vote with, are pretty glum and despondent. One of them said to me they believed the will of the people had been subverted. Another said to me that democracy just isn't working. Now, the gloomiest souls here believe that now there is a chance Brexit just doesn't happen. There are, of course, though, more upbeat people here who believe that actually it will. It was Mrs May's deal that was rejected, not Brexit itself. It's just it might now take a little bit longer. But the key thing for me was today, reporting up and down the Sunderland coast, it was easy to come across people who were prepared and indeed happy for a no-deal Brexit.
Brexit is not yet done, but the sun is setting and time running out. People here in Sunderland were the first shock Leave victory of the referendum. Tonight, 2.5 years on, there's deep disappointment at this evening's vote.
So the noes have it, the noes have it.
People here were dismayed at the sight of so many MPs voting down the PM's deal, like pro-Brexit businesswoman Margaret Liddell.
Friends and colleagues, if they've tuned into this, what will they feel?
I think they'll be irritated, and I think they'll just want them all to get on with it, and I think they're absolutely disappointed, and even I would go as far as to say disgusted with politicians. They really are fed up with it.
Why disgusted?
Because they can see that people aren't working on their behalf.
This view was widespread here today.
So this is the sort of stuff that you might be quite worried about in the event of no deal?
We're doing a big order early March.
Ailsa runs Latimer's fish shop and restaurant. She was Leave in 2016 and she's still Leave.
Has it been more difficult or easier than you thought it would be? 2.5 years of trying to leave the EU.
I think it's been a shambles. I feel really sad about it because I feel like they haven't really listened. But at the end of the day, the referendum happened, it is legally binding, we have to leave.
That's the owner's view, but what about the customers?
I'm very angry about it because I think that the 2.5 years they've spent negotiating this deal have been completely wasted.
When Sunderland's shocked 22% margin of victory for Leave was announced on referendum night, it swept away British politics as we knew it. Today people are bullish, even about no deal.
I think it's actually better than the deal that she has, so it's the better option that we have out of the two. It would be better for the UK.
Well, I was a Remainer for the sake of the young people. The way things have gone, I want out.
I would prefer a no deal.
And what about the Prime Minister?
She's trying her best to get
She's trying her best.
Definitely.
I think she's living on for a time, Pet.
Getting her Brexit deal into port has been long and slow, and its journey is very far from over. The Leave voters of Sunderland are not happy tonight's defeat means their ship is still not in. Allegra Stratton, News at 10, Sunderland.
So, as promised, to Bristol, which voted to stay in the European Union 3 summers ago. Rachel Younger has been hearing what Remain voters there made of tonight's debate and indeed vote. Rachel, over to you.
Well, you won't be surprised to hear just how much frustration there's been at tonight's events in a Remain stronghold like this one. This is one of the fastest growing economies in the country, but you speak to many business people here and they feel their success is being jeopardised by the uncertainty that is surrounding Brexit. Speaking to people from all sides today, those who voted Remain and those who voted Leave, almost everybody describes the events of the past few weeks as a total mess, and they're the ones who are being plight. Now, we are 170 miles from Westminster here, but almost everybody you speak to is striking because of their complete lack of faith in Westminster's ability to fix this. In a city that voted against the tide, there was a certain schadenfreude as the result came in from the Commons.
So the noes have it, the noes have it.
She's out, isn't she? Yeah, she's totally out. Look at her face, she knows.
But if this Bristol book club felt little warmth for the Prime Minister...
Oh, that's a huge defeat. I don't know how she can come back from that.
The opposition's response left them cold.
The Labour Party have no option on the table. He's just talking.
At the local independent brewery, they just want a sense we're getting somewhere. Flags from Europe's regions dot the walls. The machinery's German, the work is Italian, and a quarter of the 60,000 pints churned out a week head to the EU. Brexit's already curtailed their plans to triple in size, but it's a no deal they dread.
Catastrophic. 25% of what we do here is shipped internationally. So if we lose that part of our business, it will, we will potentially be laying off staff, we'll be cutting down our production here, investment will drop, and it will leave us in a very difficult position.
My message to Theresa May is sort this mess out now. 2 years is too long.
At this community radio station, listeners are divided by what they want to happen now, but united in their despair with government.
It's got to go down to a people now. The first time round, I think it was falseness. So I think a second referendum.
Not every part of Bristol voted to stay in the EU, and like everywhere else in the UK, they're wondering how the Prime Minister can bring her country back together in the wake of this.
How many of you would opt for a second referendum?
Just 16 when the referendum happened, these sixth form politics students didn't get a say then and still feel like no one's listening.
I feel like our generation isn't respected enough to have an opinion, so it wouldn't be taken into consideration anyway.
Watching all of this unfold, what's your overriding emotion?
The fact that this is all a huge national embarrassment, really. Great Britain can't make a decision.
Not want no deal.
Well, Parliament legislated for no deal, so I keep on hearing this, but Parliament passed the Article 50 bill, which said after 2 years, if you didn't have an agreement, you would leave. And it then passed the Withdrawal Act that set a date of the 29th of March for leaving. So the law is the law Parliament passed. So to say it now doesn't like it, when it's mainly the same MPs and the same peers, is, I think, showing a lack of memory or else detail of reading the laws they passed.
OK, Nikki, what do you reckon in all reality happens next?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is going to have to make very clear that the current agreement is not something that's going to stand. She needs to understand that the red lines set 2 years ago are going to have to change. And if she wants an agreement that's going to get a majority of MPs, it's going to have to be something that commands a consensus across the House of Commons. And I think the House of Commons has made it very clear that actually we will not have a no-deal situation. And that's going to be the story of the next few weeks.
OK, Andrew, you've been working really for a pretty long time on the idea of a second referendum and all the rest of it. I mean, you must think you're closer to that tonight, but realistically that has major problems too, does it not?
Well, everyone's looking for a way out now, because it's quite clear that there isn't a majority in this House of Commons for Theresa May's deal, or anything like it. I mean, let's be, frank about what happened. The biggest defeat any government has suffered in the best part of a century, and fewer than 10 Conservative MPs who aren't actually paid by the government voted with Theresa May, which is a catastrophic defeat for her. Now, on this choice between no deal and a referendum, which is what I think it will come down to, as Nikki said, the House of Commons voted last week against no deal on an amendment to the finance bill, which Nikki herself moved. And though Jacob's right that when this all started 2.5 years ago, people thought that there was no alternative but to drift towards
But is it
Brexit.
actually
I don't think that's the case
to
anymore.
stop no deal? That's what I mean. I know that a lot of people won't have followed the detail of everything that's happened. There has been a lot happening. the Speaker trying to give Parliament back control and all the rest of it. But still, you know, Jacob said the law is the law. It's been passed. Is it really possible to change it?
Well, of course, MPs constantly vote anew. Last week they voted against a no deal.
They can't
I don't think
force
that
the government to do something it doesn't want to do.
Well, we think we can.
Right.
We think that it is possible to change the rules of the House of Commons. What normally happens is that you're right, government business will take precedence. But actually it is possible to change that standing order to say that in a particular instance, actually something else, MP's business, should take precedence. And that's what a group of us are going to do. And I disagree with Andrew that the only two options are going to be between no deal and referendum. I think there is another option that both says we're leaving the EU, but gets to another place.
OK, Jacob, do you accept that you might have killed Brexit tonight?
No, I don't, because the law remains as it is. The Prime Minister is still committed to Brexit. And it's easier said than done for the House of Commons to take over as the executive. Our system has a separation between the executive and the legislature. And possibly the House of Commons could set a new timetable, but the government could then prorogue Parliament, at which point the legislation that is en route falls. So there are things the executive could do to maintain its control.
Well, it is intriguing, if nothing else, and I think the nation is watching now. So anyway, thank you very much. Indeed, no doubt we will discuss this further. Now, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said tonight's result proved the need for a second EU referendum, as we've just been discussing. Well, both the government and Parliament had failed, she said. It was time to go back to the people. Our Scotland correspondent, Peter Smith, is at the Scottish Parliament.
Yes, well, Tom, the response from the Scottish Government tonight has been swift and decisive. Nicola Sturgeon has said that her MPs at Westminster will throw their weight behind and back the motion of no confidence that has been tabled. But she's saying that regardless of who it is that leads the UK through this turbulent period, the only sensible and only credible option left now is to have a second EU referendum, and the SNP will only back that if it has Remain on the ballot paper. This is what the First Minister had to say to us earlier.
The only way forward now is to take this back to the electorate. The government, the House of Commons, has had its opportunity and has failed to come up with a workable plan. So anything else now, just playing for time, running down the clock. With every day that passes, no deal becomes a risk, and that's not acceptable.
Now, Nicola Sturgeon here is talking about timing. We are edging closer and closer to 11 p.m. on the 29th of March when we're supposed to be leaving the EU. Nicola Sturgeon is saying we have to stop the clock now, extend Article 50, give ourselves some time and space to come up with a solution. She's saying this is the point to draw a line under this. There's no point in returning to Brussels, coming back to Parliament, going back to Brussels, coming back to Parliament and banging on those same doors.
OK, Peter, thank you very much indeed. And the First Minister of Wales, Labour's Mark Drakeford, said Mrs May's defeat reinforced his view that she needed to negotiate a better deal with the European Union. In a statement, he said, the Prime Minister's deal always fell well short of what is needed to protect our economy and jobs. Since its publication, we've called on her government to go back to Brussels and ask for a deal that truly works for all of the UK. It's time for her to listen to us. Now, businesses up and down the United Kingdom have been desperate to know what on earth is going to happen with Brexit. And there is, let's be absolutely blunt, no more clarity tonight. This evening's vote came after the stock market had closed. But currencies trade around the clock, of course, and there was a bit of a jump in the value of the pound when the results came through. Our business editor, Joel Hills, joins us now. Joel, we've talked about the business and their fears so often. What's been the reaction tonight?
Well, look, the result was not a surprise. The epic scale of the defeat was what you saw in the hours leading up to the vote was the pound fall steadily in value against the dollar. And you can see here where it jumped and rallied shortly after the vote. We are, however, tonight back to where we were this morning. Buy, sell, who knows? But despite the political mess, the financial markets seem pretty sanguine. Speak to analysts, Tom, and they will tell you that they don't think that Labour will win the vote of no confidence tomorrow. And they really have a conviction that Parliament will not allow Britain to leave the European Union without some form of agreement in March. In short, they believe that Brexit will happen and that the process will largely be smooth. However unlikely that feels this evening. If that sentiment changes, expect there to be quite wild swings, swings that would be very difficult to ignore. Businesses, by contrast, Tom, are panicked. They see the clock ticking down and they worry about the events of no deal. Business groups are variously expressing their despair, their concern, their frustration, their anger. There was a conference call tonight between the Chancellor and Greg Clark, and businesses, including among them Amazon, BP, Siemens, Scottish Power. They wanted reassurance. There would not be no deal. They didn't get it.
OK, Joel, thank you very much indeed. Well, back now to events here at Westminster, and it has been quite a night. A reminder then of the vote and how the Prime Minister and Labour's Jeremy Corbyn responded to what happened.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
Every day that passes without this issue being resolved means more uncertainty, more bitterness and more rancour. The government has heard what the House has said tonight, but I ask members on all sides of the House to listen to the British people who want this issue settled.
Her governing principle of delay and denial has reached the end of the line. She cannot seriously believe that after 2 years of failure, she is capable of negotiating a good deal for the people of this country.
Well, for their final thoughts, I'm joined by our political editor, Robert, of course, and Professor Jane Green, who has been our companion on so many long referendum and election nights, I'm sure you will recall. Robert, maybe I could start with you just for a moment. What do you... I mean, is no deal off the table now, in your view, because the Parliament won't accept it? Where do you think we are?
Well, look, there is this initiative being taken by backbenchers led by Nick Bowles and Oliver Letwin, which might, in about 10 days' time, effectively take it off the table. But I want to tell you a different story. I want to tell you a story about how these events concerning Brexit could lead to the breakup of both parties. In order to get a deal through Parliament, she will almost certainly have to go for a softer Brexit that would woo a body of Labour MPs. Now, were she to do that, Tory MPs like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who we were just talking to, and there are many like-minded Tory MPs, might well feel this was no longer a Tory party they could remain part of. So that is the pressure that she faces there, the risk of the breakup of the Tory party. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, you were asking his colleague Richard Bergen whether Jeremy Corbyn would go for a referendum. Now, a majority of Labour voters, a majority probably of Labour MPs, want a referendum, or at least a very, very soft Brexit. Now, if Jeremy Corbyn does not show leadership in the direction of a referendum, then that might lead, in fact, in my view, that would lead to the breakup of the Labour Party. So both parties extraordinarily fragile tonight.
OK. Jane, this is a great moment to talk to you, as we so often do on these long nights, about where you think mood is shifting. I mean, let's just begin with the referendum. What do you think voters? Has anyone changed their mind, in your view?
This is the most fascinating moment, and yet we see a lot of stability in terms of public opinion in a very volatile context. So we see a volatile electorate, we see volatility in Parliament, in our government, in our political times, and yet we see at the moment stability in public opinion, a bit of a shift towards Remain, but nothing that's providing a really strong signal for parliamentarians to follow.
Do you think if there was another referendum, Leave would win again?
Everything depends, Tom, on what is on a ballot paper on the referendum. What we've learned today is that if there were to be a second referendum, then Theresa May's deal is not going to be on that ballot paper. So that would be the big question. If it's a case of whether it's Remain or no deal, then I think there was a good chance that Remain might win against those odds within these, the current kind of climate of public opinion. But we don't know what would be on that
and
ballot
just
paper.
Lastly and briefly, Robert's apocalyptic predictions there. Another election seems a possibility. What do you think the public reaction to that would be, briefly?
Absolutely staggering. I mean, here we are. We had a general election in 2015, a general election in 2017. If we have one in 2019, then there'll be consternation. But much more seriously than that, how do the public respond? How do the parties respond? How do the public respond? They've shown that they might do things that we don't expect them to do.
It's a big question for tomorrow and the days after. Now, we have seen many dramatic days here at Westminster in recent times, but even so, today was quite something. Defeat, yes, sure, but not as we have known it. The Prime Minister is back in Downing Street tonight, the very definition of the term embattled. She fights on, she fights to win, her dwindling band of supporters might say, but how and when, and even, she might ask in her darker moments, why? Tomorrow she faces that vote of no confidence, and after that she's only 3 days to come back to the Commons here with her plan B. And meanwhile, the rest of us here in Westminster, around the country, all across the world, can only look on as this once proud country veers dangerously towards the status of international laughingstock. Brexit was never going to be easy. There were many honest arguments on both sides, and yes, some dishonest ones too. But 2 years in, one can surely say this: we have not the faintest clue where we are going.